Now, when it comes to child sexual abuse, there are a lot more types of crimes to violate. So, child sexual abuse is a broad spectrum of behaviors in which an adult, sometimes an older adolescent, engages in inappropriate sex acts with a child or inappropriate sexual situations with a child. So, because there are a greater and broader spectrum of crimes, the idea that a person can be a victim is encompassed by a whole host of greater types of numbers of situations. So, all crimes that involved sexually touching a child, as well as non contact offenses and sexual exploitation, do constitute child sexual abuse. And so, forms of child sexual abuse include child molestation, child rape and sexual assault, uh, child incestuous abuse, child sexual exploitation. Again, so when it comes to like contact sexual offenses against children, right? Fondling a child, having sex with a child, making a child touch an adult's sex organs. Non-contact offenses would include like child peeping, which right or slash voyeurism, engaging in indecent exposure to a child, right? This is kind of like exhibitionism, exposing children to pornographic materials, masturbating in front of a child, and then sexual exploitation would be like soliciting a child for prostitution or uh, allowing other adults to have sex with children, using a child to photograph, film, or model pornography. So again, there are lots of things that are child that would constitute child sexual abuse that don't necessarily constitute any sort of adult sexual abuse. So it's the idea that sex acts become criminal when at least one of the parties does not consent when it comes to adult. But in contrast, sex acts with children or adolescents are illegal regardless of the minor's seeming consent, compliance, or cooperation. Just as children in most jurisdictions are deemed to lack uh, the appropriate capacity to make a contract, they also cannot legally consent to sex acts. And that's why um, the legal age of consent to engage in sex acts is usually between 16 and 18 in most states, not all states, but most. And that's why there's a broader range of offenses that constitute child sexual abuse. When it comes to estimating how much child sexual abuse occurs, um, roughly about 60,000 plus uh, child sexual abuse incidents were reported in the U.S. Roughly in the most recent years. So this represents about 9% of the total number of child maltreatment cases for any particular year. So roughly 10% of all child abuse cases are constitute child sexual abuse. So research conducted by the CDC estimates that approximately one fourth of girls and 1 in 6 boys is sexually abused before their 18th birthday. So, whether the amount of child sexual abuse has changed over time is a matter of debate. Some researchers report a decrease from the mid 1990s to 2005, which again overlaps with the decreasing crime rate in society overall in the US, while others do not find much variation over time when it comes to child abuse and child sexual abuse. And so for here, it's important to realize. Let me stop right here. The main idea here is that when a child has been identified as a victim of sexual abuse, it's often very important to take a look at what else is going on in the child lives because children who are victims of sexual abuse are oftentimes what we refer to as polyvictims. They experience a broad range of different types of abuse. So, in addition to having sexual abuse, that child may be maltreated, right? Their parents may not be feeding them or feeding them very poorly. They may not be taken to school or being taught things, so, right? So there's this maltreatment, right? There's a neglect as well. Additionally, they may be the victims of physical abuse by not just their parents, but siblings, emotional abuse, verbal abuse as well. And if they do go to school, they might be bullied by other kids, or if they don't go to school, they might be bullied by other kids in the neighborhood. So it's important to identify, or when these children are identified, to take a look at how or what is going on in their lives, because many children who are victims of sexual abuse are also victims of a variety of other kinds of abuses. Additionally, when it comes to uh, child sexual abuse, there are cultural misunderstandings. And so, one thing I'd like to address is the idea that children are resilient. If they have a challenging or traumatic event, they can make it through. And it's true that many children who do experience any sort of child abuse or child sexual abuse, as it were, in this case, won't go on to be these maladaptive, predatory adults who are antisocial and have terrible, debilitating mental illnesses. That doesn't mean that they won't have problems in life, right? A lot of people have problems, and I'm not trying to uh, trivialize the kinds and sorts of problems that victims of child sexual abuse do have, because we know that there are certain risks involved after being a victim of child sexual abuse. And so it's important to monitor these and to seek help so that you can mitigate or reduce the chances of these known outcomes occurring. And so, yes, children may be resilient, and most of them won't turn out to be monsters and adults when they grow up, just because they had these terrible things happen to them when they were children. But that doesn't mean we don't need to look out and continue to look out for their well being after they've been identified.